get punished, and people who did the wrong things get rewarded. And again, that is the value we are trying to act on. In welfare, we're ending the system that took money from hard-working taxpayers and gave it to people who refused to work even though they could. These are the differences that we're trying to make. Listening to people, doing the hard and necessary work of changing our country for the better. But there was something else that we heard on the doorstep, and it was this. It was people repeatedly saying, we're concerned about the levels of immigration into our country, and we're fed up with hearing politicians talk about it, but actually do nothing. And here again, this government is determined to be different. Now, immigration is a hugely emotive subject, and it's a debate too often in the past shaped by assertions rather than substantive arguments. We've all heard them. There's the assertion that mass immigration is an unalloyed good and that controlling it is economic madness. Or there's the view that Britain is a soft touch and that immigrants are simply here to take whatever they can get. I believe the role of politicians is to cut through the extremes of this debate and approach the subject sensibly and reasonably. The last government, in contrast, I think actually helped to inflame the debate. On the one hand, there were Labour ministers who closed down discussion, giving the impression that if you raised concerns about immigration, that was somehow racist. On the other hand, there were ministers who were hell-bent on sort of burnishing their hardline credentials by talking tough, but not actually doing anything to bring the numbers down. Now, this approach had damaging consequences in terms of controlling immigration, but it also had damaging consequences in terms of the public debate. It created the space for extremist parties to flourish, because they could tell people that mainstream politicians weren't listening to their concerns or doing anything about something they were worried about. I remember when immigration wasn't a central political issue in our country, and I would badly like that to be the case again. I want us to starve extremist parties of the oxygen of public anxiety that they thrive on and extinguish them once and for all. Above all, I want to get the policy right. I want good immigration, not mass immigration. And I think that is what the vast amount of people in this country want too. That's why I believe it's time for a new approach, one which opens up the debate, not closes it down, and one where politicians don't just talk, but also act. So let's start with being open. The British people are fair-minded, and I want them to feel that they can be honest about what they think about this subject. And here's what I think. Our country has benefited immeasurably from immigration. Go to any hospital and you will find people from Uganda, from India, from Pakistan, who are caring for our sick and our vulnerable and doing a fantastic job. Go into our schools and universities and you'll find teachers from all over the world inspiring our young people. Go to almost any high street in the country and you'll find entrepreneurs from overseas who are not just adding to the local economy, but who are playing a part in local life. Charities, financial services, fashion, food, music, all these sectors are what they are because of immigration. So yes, immigrants make a huge contribution to Britain. We recognise that and we welcome it. But I'm also clear about something else. For too long, immigration has been too high. Between 1997 and 2009, 2.2 million more people came to live in this country than left to go and live abroad. That is the largest influx of people that Britain has ever had. And it has placed real pressures on communities up and down our country. Not just pressure on schools and housing and healthcare, though those have been serious, but social pressures too. Because real communities aren't just collections of public service users living in the same space. Real communities are bound by common experiences, forged by friendship and by conversation, knitted together by all the rituals of the neighbourhood, from the school run to the chat down the pub. And these bonds take time. And so real integration takes time too. That's why when there have been significant numbers of new people arriving in neighbourhoods, perhaps not able to speak the same language as those living there, on occasions not really wanting or even being willing to integrate, that has created a kind of discomfort and a disjointedness in some neighbourhoods. This has been the experience for many people in our country, and I believe it's untruthful and unfair not to speak about it and not to address it. So taking all this into account, I believe that controlling immigration and bringing it down is of vital importance to the future of our country. That's why during the election campaign, Conservatives made a clear commitment to the British people that we would aim to reduce net migration to the levels we saw in the 1980s and the 1990s. Now we're in government, we are on track to meet that aim. We're controlling legal immigration, having introduced a cap on non-EU economic migrants. We're clamping down on illegal immigration, and we're getting to grips too with the asylum system. The UK Border Agency is now close to clearing the backlog of almost 500,000 asylum cases. Our action is working, but some myths have crept in about what we're doing and about the impact our policies will have. There are those who say that whatever measures we put in place, we cannot control immigration significantly. And there are those who accept we can control immigration, but argue that the way we propose to do it will damage our economy and damage our universities. And today, I want to take those two myths head on. Let me begin by addressing those who say, well, you can't control immigration. They've basically got three planks to their argument. First, they say, legal immigration is impossible to control because we're members of the European Union and because of free movement within the European Union. Second, they argue that illegal immigration can't be controlled because it's impossible to police it properly. And third, they say that immigration will always be high because immigrant workers do jobs that British people simply won't do. Now, I believe that each part of that argument is wrong, and I want to take them all on. First, let's take the question of Europe. Yes, our borders are open to people from other member states in the European Union, but actually this counts for a small proportion of overall net migration to the UK. In the year up to June 2010, for example, net migration to our country from EU nationals was just 27,000. Now, that's not to say migration from Europe has been insignificant. Since 2004, when many large Eastern European countries joined the EU, more than 1 million people from those countries have come to live and work in the UK. That is a huge number. We said back then that transitional controls should have been put in place to restrict the numbers coming. And now we're in government. If and when new countries join the European Union, transitional controls will be put in place. But this remains the fact. When it comes to immigration to our country, it's the numbers from outside the European Union that really matter. In the year to June 2010, when, as I said, there were 27,000 net coming from the EU, net migration from nationals of countries outside the EU coming to the UK totaled 198,000. This is the figure we can more easily control, and we should control. Last week, our new immigration cap for people coming here to work from outside the EU came into force. And it means for the next 12 months, we will not allow employers to recruit more than 20,700 skilled workers from outside Europe. And we've already shown that a cap can work. Last July, we placed interim limits on the number of visas we'd give for skilled workers, and this kept the numbers down to under 20,000. Now, of course, employment is just one of the routes of entry and settlement into this country. Every year, tens of thousands of people marry into Britain or join their families here. Now, many of these are genuine, loving relationships, but we also know there are abuses to the system. For a start, there are forced marriages taking place in our country and overseas as a means of gaining entry to the UK. Now, this is the practice where some young British girls are bullied and threatened into marrying someone they don't want to. Now, I have got no time for those who say this is a culturally relative issue. Frankly, it is wrong, full stop, and we've got to stamp it out. Then there are just the straightforward sham marriages, which we all will have read about. Last summer, we ordered the UK Border Agency to clamp down on these, and they've had significant success, making 155 arrests. And there was also the shocking case of a vicar who was jailed for staging over 300 sham marriages. But as well as abuse of the system, there are other problems with what's called the family route. We know, for instance, that some marriages take place when the spouse is very young and has little or no grasp of English. Again, I don't believe we should allow cultural sensitivity to stop us from acting. That's why last November we introduced a requirement for all those applying for a marriage visa to demonstrate a minimum standard of English, and we will defend the age limit of 21 for spouses coming to the UK. So however sensitive or difficult a subject it may be, we are tightening up the family route. But by far the biggest route for non-EU entrants into this country has been the student visa route. Immigration by students has almost trebled in the past decade. Last year, some 303,000 visas were issued overseas for study in the UK. But this isn't the end of the story, because a lot of those students bring people with them to this country: husbands, wives, children. Indeed, last year, 32,000 visas were issued to the dependents of students. Now again, many of these applications are for legitimate students doing legitimate courses with, of course, legitimate dependents coming over with them. But we know that some of these student applications are bogus, and in turn their dependents are bogus. Consider this: a sample of 231 visa applications for the dependents of students found that only 25% of them, only a quarter of them, were genuine dependents. The others, well, some were clearly gaming the system and had no genuine or loving relationship with the student, and others we just couldn't be sure about. The whole system was out of control, and we're now getting to grips with it, and that badly needs to be done. We're targeting bogus colleges that offer sham courses. We're making sure that anyone studying for a degree-level course has a proper grasp of the English language. We're saying that only postgraduate students can bring dependents. And we're making sure that if people come over here to study, they should be studying rather than working. And that when they finish their studies, they go home unless they're offered a graduate-level skilled job with a minimum salary. Now, taken together, we estimate these proposals will cut the number of student visas issued by around 80,000 a year. So across all the main routes of entry to Britain, work, family, education, we're taking action simultaneously. And the key word here is simultaneously, because as the Home Secretary has said, controlling immigration by clamping down on one route alone is like squeezing a balloon. Push down on work visas and the number of student visas will shoot up. Clamp down on student visas and family visas will spring up. For years, people have been playing the system, exploiting the easiest routes of entry to the UK. But now, because of what we're doing, this country finally has consistent controls right across the immigration system. But as I said in a speech in opposition, what matters most is not who comes into the country, but who stays. And of course, there are fair and legitimate reasons for people who arrive here temporarily to then stay here permanently. But the figures clearly suggest that many gain temporary admission to the UK with absolutely no plans to leave. More than a fifth of students who entered Britain in 2004 were still here 5 years later, and many of them were supposed to be coming on short study courses. But the most significant route to permanent settlement is the economic migration route. Last year, 84,000 people who initially came on a work visa got the right to settle here permanently. I want Britain to continue to attract the best workers, but it cannot be right that people coming to fill short-term skills gaps can stay long-term. As the cross-party balanced migration group has argued, it's essential that we break the link between temporary visas and permanent settlement. They are right, and that is what the government is determined to do, and we will consult on how best to proceed on this in the coming months. So this is the progress we're making on cutting legal immigration and clamping down on the abuse of legitimate entry routes. But we're also cracking down on illegal immigration too. And this is a question of fairness. Yes, to the British people, but also to those who've been shipped over here against their will, sometimes kept as slaves and forced to work horrendous hours. So as part of our National Crime Agency, we are establishing a proper border policing command, which will crack down on people smuggling. And because of better technology and closer working with the French, we've managed to cut the number of people identified trying to cross the Channel illegally by 2/3 last year. At the same time as stopping illegal immigrants coming to Britain, we're doing something about those who are already here. 2 nationwide campaigns targeting illegal migrants have resulted in 1,400 arrests, 330 prosecutions, and 260 removals. And in the 6 months to the end of February, we collected some 3.6 million in fines from employers of illegal workers. And it's right, those people should be pursued.